The morning light cut sharply through the vast panes of glass, lining the upper floors of Vance Dynamics, casting pale reflections on polished concrete and sleek steel. The city below hadn't quite stirred, but Alexander Vance was already striding through the executive wing, coffee in one hand, silence in his wake. He was never in this early. His mornings were precise, but never rushed. Yet something had pulled him in today, a restlessness, perhaps, or instinct, the kind that didn't need to be explained. He pushed open the door to his private office, eyes already moving toward the data pad on his desk, then froze mid-step. There was someone inside. Not just someone, Evelyn Hart, his secretary. She hadn't heard the door. Her back was to him, blouse half unbuttoned, the curve of her shoulder catching a slant of morning light. She was pulling on a clean shirt, her messy bun slightly loosened, revealing the elegant line of her neck. He saw her pause, maybe sensing his presence, and then, as if in slow motion, she turned. Their eyes locked. For a split second, no one moved. The moment stretched, breathless and quiet. Evelyn's blouse was held against her chest. Her lips parted slightly in surprise, cheeks flushing a deep, unmistakable red. "Mr. Vance," she said quickly, voice rising with panic. I didn't think anyone." He should have turned away, should have muttered an apology and left. But instead, he stood there, caught not by her state of undress, but by the rawness in her expression. She wasn't the composed, efficient force who managed his calendar and disarmed board members with her sharp tongue. She looked human, flushed, real. It unsettled him. She was fumbling now, pulling on the blouse with awkward haste. "The dry cleaning service messed up my delivery. I was just changing. I didn't think you came in before 7. I don't," he said slowly, blinking as if waking from a trance. Usually, the silence that followed was heavy, awkward. The air between them buzzed with something neither could name. Finally, Evelyn squared her shoulders, every inch the professional. Now, though the color still clung stubbornly to her cheeks. "I'm sorry for the intrusion. I'll be out of your office immediately." He nodded but didn't move. His gaze lingered longer than it should have, something unreadable in his eyes. Then, just before she passed him, he spoke again low, thoughtful. "You're not what I expected, Miss Hart." She stopped, one hand on the door handle, back still to him. "No one ever is," she said quietly, before stepping out into the hallway. The door clicking softly shut behind her. Alexander remained still, the silence in the office now deafening. His coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. That wasn't how mornings usually began, and for reasons he didn't yet understand. He knew that wasn't the last unexpected thing Evelyn Hart would bring into his life. Asterisk, asterisk, the whispers started before noon. By the time Evelyn returned to her desk, freshly dressed and steady on the surface, the office was humming with low-tone conversations, subtle glances, and the kind of artificial smiles people wear when they pretend they weren't just talking about you. The executive floor, usually sterile with professionalism, now vibrated with tension. She kept her gaze forward, her spine straight. The sting of embarrassment from earlier still sat like a live wire beneath her skin, but she forced herself to focus. She had a full schedule of board memos to finalize, a presentation to format for a European investor call, and a new hires orientation packet to review before the afternoon meeting. She didn't have time for gossip or for the unsettling memory of Alexander Vance standing still, staring at her like she was something he didn't know how to categorize. She hadn't expected him to linger. That was the worst part. He wasn't just her boss. He was the boss, the legend, the youngest CEO to take a tech company from seed funding to global dominance in under a decade, known for being decisive, calculated, and unreachable. And yet, this morning, he had looked at her like she was the unexpected variable in an otherwise perfect equation. She'd worked for men like him before, or so she thought. Men who thought secretaries were decorations. Men who hid their ego behind charm and their flaws behind status. Evelyn had become fluent in the art of invisibility, making herself indispensable while giving nothing away. But Alexander Vance was different. He never flirted, never lost his cool. He didn't need the power followed him like a shadow. His indifference was legendary, but now, that indifference had cracked, and people had noticed. "Rough morning," came a voice over her desk divider. It was Rachel from HR, friendly on the surface, but her eyes gleamed with something else, curiosity, maybe even envy. "Just a laundry emergency," Evelyn replied evenly, eyes still on her screen. Rachel smirked. Well, whatever it was. The CEO seemed very attentive. Evelyn said nothing, fingers flying across her keyboard. She didn't know Rachel an explanation or anyone. What bothered her more than the office chatter was why it bothered her. She'd face worse. Much worse. But it wasn't just the stares, it was that she couldn't stop replaying the look in Alexander's eyes. It wasn't lust. It was an amusement. It was curiosity. Like she'd peeled back some invisible layer he hadn't expected to exist. She shook it off. Focused. By late afternoon, she had fallen into her usual rhythm. She was quick, efficient, and invisible again. Or so she thought. Her inbox pinged with a calendar update. Subject: CEO briefing for PM location, executive lounge, 48th floor, private access only. Evelyn's stomach flipped. That was not a normal meeting location. She stared at it for a full 30 seconds before her fingers moved to type a reply asking for clarification, but paused. She knew better. Alexander Vance didn't mistype. Still, she hesitated as she stepped into the elevator at 3:55 p.m. The 48th floor wasn't used for regular business. It was for private meetings, strategy summits, or rare crisis briefings. The lounge there overlooked the skyline with floor-to-ceiling windows, stocked with a private bar, leather chairs, and thick glass doors meant to silence the world. When she arrived, the room was empty. She stood awkwardly at the edge, unsure if she'd misread something. When the doors behind her clicked shut, "I thought you might not come," Alexander's voice said. She turned sharply. He stood near the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of something amber and neat. His jacket was off, his sleeves rolled back, casual, but not comfortable. "I wasn't sure I was supposed to," she replied carefully. He turned, those sharp, dark eyes fixed on her again, unreadable, relentless. "I needed to apologize," he said, "for this morning." She blinked. "That's unnecessary. It was a mistake. I shouldn't have." "No," he cut in. "It was a mistake, but it revealed something I didn't expect." There was a beat of silence. "I saw something real," he added, more quietly, "and it surprised me." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "With all due respect, Mr. Vance, I don't need to be seen by you." A muscle in his jaw ticked. "That's not what I meant." She crossed her arms. "Then say what you mean." His gaze locked onto hers, and for the first time, she saw hesitation in him. "I don't let people close," he said finally. "Not since." He didn't finish the sentence. She waited. When he didn't elaborate, she stepped forward, measured but firm. "You don't have to let me close. I'm your secretary, not your therapist. And yet," he said softly, "you're the first person in years who's made me wonder if I've been wrong to keep everyone out." She stared at him, the fire in her chest rising like it had been waiting for this moment. "You don't know me," she said, "and you don't get to use me to test your comfort with emotions." Something flickered in his gaze, guilt, admiration. "I wasn't trying to," he said. "I asked you here to apologize, but also to ask you not to transfer departments." She went still. "Transfer? The head of research requested you yesterday. I didn't approve it." "I don't want to." Evelyn's heart pounded. She hadn't known anyone had requested her at all. "I didn't accept," she said quietly. He nodded once. Their eyes locked again, longer this time, deeper. Something unspoken passed between them, dangerous and electric. She turned to leave, before it could grow into something neither of them could undo. But as the door shut behind her, she could feel it. A line had been crossed, and nothing was going to be the same again. The Monday after their conversation on the 48th floor, something changed. It wasn't obvious. There were no declarations, no glances held along across the boardroom table. No secret smiles passed between them, but it was there, humming beneath the surface like a frequency only the two of them could hear. Evelyn arrived precisely at 7:58 a.m., as she always did, and found her desk stacked with reports. But unlike before, the paperwork wasn't routine. It was layered, coated with nuanced legal clauses, obscure references to overseas holdings, and terms in 5 different languages: German, Mandarin, Korean, Arabic, and Japanese. No context, no briefing, just a sticky note in clean block letters. Highlight: potential red flags. Do not miss anything. AV. There were no greetings, no explanation. Only a test. She sat down, cracked her knuckles, and dove and by mid-morning. The office was a storm of movement, phones ringing, assistants racing past with coffee trays, department heads murmuring behind closed doors. something was happening, and Evelyn wasn't the only one who noticed. Is it true? Rachel from HR leaned over the divider, lowering her voice. About the foreign merger. Evelyn didn't look up. I'm not in mergers. Rachel rolled her eyes. Come on. You're on Vance's hip half the time. If he's making a move on a South Korean firm that affects all of us, rumor is their CTO might defect to us. I'm sure if it involves HR, you'll be notified. Evelyn said evenly, then returned to her screen. Rachel huffed and walked away. By noon, Evelyn had highlighted 6 discrepancies buried deep in the documents, each one subtle enough to pass casual review, but significant enough to pose risk. She printed the notes, clipped them with the translations, and walked them up to the executive floor. Alexander's door was open. He stood with his back to her, staring out the glass wall behind his desk, arms crossed. The view overlooked the Manhattan skyline, but Evelyn doubted he saw any of it. Without turning, he said, "You found something." She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. 6 things, possibly 7. He turned slowly. His eyes scanned her face first, then the folder in her hand. She passed it to him. Page 12 in the Korean agreement. The phrase operational. Silence can mean restricted access or government surveillance, depending on context. If you're not careful, you'll be agreeing to let their cyber division audit our back end without warrants. A shadow passed through his expression. He flipped through the notes quickly, eyes sharp. I flagged the others. One document appears to be Dr. Post's signature, she added. He didn't speak for a moment, just stared at the papers like they had turned into a confession. Then, softly, do you know how long my legal team has been reviewing these? I'm guessing 3 weeks, she said, and they missed what you gave me 6 hours to catch. He met her eyes then, and for a heartbeat, the mask cracked. I underestimated you. He said quietly, no, she replied. You expected me to fail. He didn't deny it. There was a knock on the door. Before either could speak, it opened. Julian Cross, head of corporate strategy, swept in Alex. The Korean reps are waiting for the Julian froze mid-sentence, eyes darting from Evelyn to the file in Alexander's hands. Oh, I didn't realize you had company. Evelyn met his look without flinching. She's not company, Alexander said, voice calm. She's the reason I'm not about to walk into a deal built on fraud. Julian's expression shifted slightly. Ah, impressive. Miss Hart, was it? Ms. Evelyn corrected smoothly. Julian chuckled. Of course. Alexander didn't take his eyes off her. Reschedule the meeting with legal. I need to make some decisions before I trust anyone else to read a contract. Julian hesitated. You mean delay the board's timeline? I mean, Alexander said, his tone suddenly. Steele, we're not losing another acquisition to fine print and arrogance. Reschedule. Julian nodded stiffly and left, closing the door behind him. Evelyn stood still. Was that necessary? Alexander placed the folder down gently. Julian only respects people who draw blood. You're letting me play in a world where people wear knives under their smiles, she said. You sure I belong here? He looked at her, then really looked. You don't just belong here. You're already ahead of most of them. You just don't know it yet. His words caught her off guard. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Forgot she was supposed to keep her distance. Then he added, but you also have a target on your back now. They'll notice. She nodded. Once. Let them. And she left the office without another word. Heels clicking like gunfire down the hallway. That evening, Evelyn returned to her apartment to find her younger brother, Noah, waiting with a pizza and a grin. He was nonverbal, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. She smiled back, shoulders finally relaxing. She didn't know that 3 floors above her, in a penthouse surrounded by silence, Alexander stood at his window, replaying the sound of her voice, the weight of her gaze, the way she hadn't flinched not once, and for the first time in years. He wondered what it would feel like to trust someone again. Asterisk, it was after midnight when Evelyn's phone buzzed. A single message, a marked number, no subject line. Be in the main lobby by 6 a.m. Dress for discretion. AV, no explanation, no location beyond the lobby, no context. She stared at the message, heart skipping a beat. She thought back to the day's chaos. Korean negotiations halted, a new audit launched, and her name now circulating in circles it was never supposed to reach. Whispers had started to follow her, like shadows in the elevator, in the copy room, even in her inbox. People were watching now, and still, Alexander Vance sent her a message like that. No apology, no excuse, just an instruction dot at 5:59 a.m. Evelyn stepped into the marble echo of Vance Dynamics' private lobby wearing dark jeans, a fitted jacket, and flats of rare change from her corporate armor. No makeup, hair pulled back, ready for anything. She didn't wait long. A black car pulled up at the curb outside, sleek and silent. Tinted windows, unmarked body, no plate she could see. The rear door open, revealing Alexander himself in a dark coat, phone in hand, coffee. Untouched on the console. Get in, he said simply. No greeting, no smile. But when their eyes met, something passed between them like the aftermath of a storm neither of them had named yet. She climbed it without a word. The doors shut. The world outside faded. They drove in silence for a while, the city still groggy with sleep. It wasn't until they crossed the Brooklyn Bridge that Evelyn finally asked, "Are we running from something or toward it?" Alexander's mouth twitched. In what could have been the start of a smile, both. She folded her arms. "You know I'm not great with riddles before coffee. You're about to meet someone," he said. "Someone who shouldn't exist anymore." Evelyn turned toward him. "Care to elaborate?" He hesitated, and that, more than anything, made her sit straighter. "She was the head of my mother's internal ethics committee," he said finally, "when my mother founded the company. Long before I took over, she built it around one principle: trust nothing you can't audit. After her death, I kept that principle, in theory, but I didn't trust anyone to enforce it. Until recently." Evelyn's heart raced. "And you're bringing her back now?" "She disappeared 5 years ago," he said quietly, "after filing a sealed report that implicated one of my current board members in espionage. That took her breath. Why wasn't it acted on? Because before I could read it, the report was locked under legal hold, buried in cross-litigation, and then she vanished." Evelyn blinked. "And now she's resurfaced?" "She reached out last night," he said, "through a backdoor server. Sent encrypted files, things that make your Korean document flags look like paper cuts." They pulled into an underground garage beneath a nondescript building in Red Hook. No signage, no guards, just a narrow elevator with a rusted keypad and a fingerprint scanner. Alexander placed his thumb on the glass. The doors opened. They rode down into silence. "I brought you," he said suddenly, "because she requested you." Evelyn frowned. "She doesn't even know me. She knows someone's been cleaning up after my blind spots, and she trusts that you're not on anyone's payroll but mine." The elevator door slid open. The space beyond looked more like a war bunker than an office. Metal walls, exposed piping, old tech. At a desk lined with monitors stood a thin, white-haired woman with eyes sharp as shattered glass. "Miss Hart," she said as Evelyn approached. "Nice to finally meet you." Evelyn offered her hand. "Likewise, though I have a feeling you know more about me than I do you." The woman's smile was cold and razor-thin. "I know enough." Alexander stood beside them, his voice now stripped of its usual control. "Show her." The woman, whose name Evelyn still didn't know, tapped a key. The screens lit up. Video feeds, email trails, internal memos, all tied to Julian Cross, and more shockingly, communications with an overseas competitor, names Evelyn recognized, dates that coincided with every blocked acquisition, every data leak, every coincidence they chalked up to market volatility. Evelyn's stomach dropped. "He's been bleeding the company from the inside," the woman said, "feeding intel to his silent partners in exchange for shadow stock. Once he forces a merger, he'll become the CEO of the new parent company and take Vance Dynamics from you." Evelyn whispered. Alexander didn't answer. "He didn't need to," the woman added. "He's close, weeks, maybe less." Evelyn glanced at Alexander, then back to the screens. "So why not go to the board?" "Because half of them are compromised," the woman said grimly. "And you don't expose rot by shouting. You cut it out quietly." Evelyn stepped back from the screens. Her mind was racing, already calculating angles, response protocols, damage containment. "I need to go back to the office," she said suddenly. "There's a way I can start feeding misdirection, make them think we're planning a buyout in Taiwan instead. It'll slow them down, confuse the pattern." Alexander stared at her for a long moment. "You're not just a secretary," he said. "No," she replied. "I'm your firewall." He nodded. "Then we go to war." That night, Evelyn stayed in the office long past midnight, lights off, only the screen of her monitor illuminating the determined lines of her face. Alexander, in the glass-walled office above, watched her from the shadows. He realized, with growing clarity, that she wasn't just protecting his company. She was the only person left who might still save him from himself. The silence in the executive elevator was louder than a siren. Evelyn stood alone, watching her reflection ripple slightly in the brushed metal walls. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was not. The morning after their trip to the hidden bunker in Red Hook had changed everything. She hadn't slept. Neither had Alexander, at least. She doubted it. They had spent the night trading encrypted messages through a private channel, mapping out a false trail for Julian Cross and the compromise board. Dummy IP addresses, falsified acquisition rumors, and red herring reports seeded across their internal systems. By 8 a.m., she stepped out onto the top floor of Advanced Dynamics, not just as a secretary but as a silent weapon. She moved like a ghost through the hallways, unnoticed but aware of everything. Her heels were muted on the matte black tile, her expression unreadable. People assumed she was just the assistant. They were wrong. At precisely 8:30, Alexander stepped out of his office. He looked no different than usual, tailored navy suit, crisp, white shirt, not a hair out of place, but Evelyn saw the subtle shift, the tension in his shoulders, the narrowed eyes. Today wasn't just about managing meetings. It was about staying 10 steps ahead of betrayal. They exchanged no words, just a single glance. At 9 a.m., the boardroom doors opened. The quarterly review meeting began. 12 members, 12 carefully cultivated egos. Julian Cross sat to seats from Alexander, sharp in a charcoal suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Evelyn stood in her usual place at the back of the room, tablet in hand, eyes alert. It began harmlessly enough: market, performance, revenue growth, project upgrades. But then Julian spoke. "I'd like to introduce a supplemental proposal regarding our Asia-Pacific strategy," he said, voice smooth. "I believe there's a more aggressive acquisition model we should explore, starting with a mid-tier Taiwanese robotics firm that's currently undervalued." Evelyn's heartbeat once hard, perfect. He took the bait. Alexander leaned forward, giving every appearance of interest. "Which firm?" Julian smiled. "Nextech Robotics. Their IP portfolio could give us a strategic advantage in automation and logistics, and I happen to have early access to their projections, which you only have because we let you have them," Evelyn thought, her fingers hovering just above the tablet screen. She was already running a script feeding the board. Digital projections and fake analytics. Every number, every stat, all fabricated, a whisper of misdirection, designed to draw Julian deeper into the trap. "I'd like to propose a formal vote to explore the acquisition," Julian added. Half the board looked uncertain. A few nodded. Alexander tapped his pen twice against the table, a barely visible signal. Evelyn spoke for the first time. "Excuse me," she said clearly, stepping forward. "Before any votes are cast, I'd like to distribute a few additional documents." 12 heads turned. She handed out carefully curated packets, one by one, marked confidential, internal risk assessment. Julian frowned. "This wasn't on the agenda." "No," Evelyn replied, "because it wasn't ready until an hour ago." He opened his packet. So did the others. Inside, reports detailing potential conflicts of interest, suspicious stock movements surrounding Nextech, and irregular communication logs that pointed directly at Julian's office. Evelyn turned to the board. "These documents suggest that Nextech may already have undisclosed ties to foreign stakeholders, some of whom are known competitors. Approving a vote without further investigation could result in an international audit." Julian's face went pale. "This is outrageous," he said sharply. "Where is this coming from?" Alexander leaned back in his chair, calm, cold. "Do you deny having direct communications with a Taiwanese financial shell called Heaping Ventures?" Julian blinked. "That name doesn't mean anything to me." Evelyn stepped forward again. "Then why is it routed through your private offshore accounts in the Caymans?" Silence. A pin could have dropped on the carpet and echoed like thunder. One of the board members, a longtime skeptic named Langston, cleared his throat. "I think we should delay any vote and initiate an internal audit." Another nodded. Then another. Julian stood abruptly. "This is a smear campaign." Alexander rose too, but slower. "If it is, then you'll have nothing to worry about." But Julian wasn't looking at Alexander. He was looking at Evelyn. There was something in his stare, sharp, vengeful. He knew. He finally saw her for what she really was. Not a background ornament, not a coffee fetcher, but a threat. Later, After the boardroom had emptied and legal had been summoned to begin a quiet internal review, Evelyn stood alone in the elevator again, the doors open on the 48th floor. Alexander was there, waiting in his office, glass walls casting long shadows across the room. The sun was setting behind him, outlining his figure in gold and shadow. Close the door, he said. She obeyed. You were flawless today, he said simply. I only gave them truth. No, you gave them leverage. That's rarer than truth. He walked toward her then, slowly, his expression unreadable. There was tension in his job. It wasn't the anger he usually wore when things went wrong. It was something else. You stood in front of 12 billionaires, he said, and dismantled a traitor with a folder in your voice. She lifted her chin. I did what had to be done. You could have walked away from this, from me. I could have, she whispered. Alexander took one more step closer. The air between them was electric, now raw and undeniable. But you didn't, he said. No. Their eyes locked. Her pulse thundered. His breathing slowed. He lifted his hand, slowly, almost like he wasn't sure if she'd let him. Then he brushed a single strand of hair behind her ear. I see you, Evelyn Hart, he said. And for the first time since this all began, she didn't look away, because for the first time, someone had meant it. Asterisk. The storm hit just after sunset. Not the kind that rattled windows or drenched the city in rain, but the kind that started with a name whispered in the dark, passed between trembling lips in smoky corners of boardrooms, the kind that shattered empires with rumors before a single truth hit daylight. By the time Evelyn reached her apartment that night, she could feel it in her bones. Something had shifted again. The illusion of control was thinning. Her phone buzzed. Alexander, I need you back at HQ, now. Don't go through the front. No explanation, no time for questions. She slipped off her heels, threw on a dark coat, and called Noah's night nurse to watch him for a few extra hours. Within 20 minutes, she was slipping through the underground garage entrance. Advanced Dynamics, her ID granting her quiet access through a service elevator that smelled like dust and secrets. The building was nearly empty, but not still. Voices echoed faintly through the upper levels, muffled, urgent. She followed them. On the 47th floor, the floor just below executive, she found Alexander pacing a war room of lit-up screens, one hand on his hip, the other clutching a black folder with a crimson seal. Evelyn had only seen that seal once before in the Red Hook bunker. It was an Advanced Dynamics file. It was hers. You weren't followed, he asked, voice sharp and low. No, she said, stepping forward. What happened? He didn't answer immediately, just turned the folder around and laid it flat on the table between them. Inside were printed screenshots, satellite photos, grainy surveillance captures. All of them were of her. Different angles, entering buildings, speaking to investors, walking with Alexander outside the Red Hook facility. She felt her blood run cold. Someone's building a case, he said grimly. Not against me, against you. She stared at the photos. Why? They're trying to paint you as the mole, the one who leaked everything to foreign competitors. But they know that's not true, she said, pulse racing. That doesn't matter, Alexander replied. They don't need it to be true. They just need it to look true long enough for a formal inquiry. Her mind raced. Is this Julian's retaliation? No. He's out of play. This is bigger. This came from a private intelligence firm in Zurich. Unmarked. No digital trail. She swallowed hard. They're going to try to destroy my name. They'll try to erase you entirely. He stepped closer, eyes burning with frustration. No, fury. This is my fault. I put you in their line of fire. You should have never had to. Don't you dare. She interrupted. Don't you dare regret letting me fight. The emotion in her voice stopped him. Evelyn, they'll come for everything. Your employment record, your guardianship, over Noah, your identity. If we don't get ahead of this, then we will, she said, stepping into his space. But I need to know, are you with me, or am I standing here alone? Alexander's jaw clenched. Then he did something Evelyn had never seen him do. He lowered his guard. Completely. He took a breath, closed the distance, and for the first time, his hand didn't hover or hesitate. It found hers, steady, certain. You're not alone, he said. Not now. Not ever. Their fingers locked. But the moment was shattered by the piercing buzz of the security console. Red light. Emergency alert. Unauthorized access attempt. Mainframe level. Alexander moved fast, swiping across the nearest screen. Evelyn watched as a cascade of warning codes filled the feed. Someone was inside the system. Their system. How is that possible? She whispered. No one has those credentials except... She froze. Her eyes widened. Kaylin. Alexander blinked. The chief data architect. No, she's been on leave. Family emergency. That was the lie. Evelyn said. She's the only one with old architecture clearance, and if she's in now... Alexander stared at her. She's not just helping them. She is one of them, Evelyn finished, and she's inside the vault. Before he could respond, Evelyn was already moving. I'm going down there, she said. You're not trained for this. He snapped. Neither are you. She shot back. But you trust me, remember. He hesitated for half a second, then nodded. You need this, he said. Tossing her a secure ID badge encoded with master override access, she caught it midair. And without looking back, Evelyn Hart disappeared into the dark veins of the building, chasing ghosts, hunting truths, and walking straight into the belly of a machine built to devour people like her. What she didn't know was that Kaylin wasn't just there to steal data. She was there to plant something much worse. And if Evelyn didn't stop it in time, the system wouldn't just erase her. It would erase everything. Asterisk, the corridors beneath. Vance Dynamics were nothing like the glass and marble elegance of its upper floors. Down here, the walls were lined with thick steel, the lights dim and flickering, and every step echoed like a whisper in a tomb. This was the underbelly of the empire, a place even most executives didn't know existed. Evelyn held the override badge tight in her palm, its edges digging into her skin with every step. The ID wasn't just a key, it was a declaration, a symbol that Alexander Vance had placed his trust in her. Something no one else had managed in years, something dangerous. She moved fast, heart pounding, but her mind focused. Level B7 housed the company's original architecture vaults, obsolete servers to some, but in reality, they were storage for archived code, encrypted files, and backdoor access to every piece of infrastructure Vance Dynamics had ever touched, including the redacted research connected to the sabotage that killed Alexander's mother. Evelyn reached the vault door. It was cracked open. Her breath caught. A single sliver of light bled through the gap, casting a thin golden line onto the floor. She pulled the sidearm from the emergency case down the hall. A non-lethal shock pistol checked the charge and pressed forward. The air inside was colder, metallic, and it smelled faintly of ozone, like electricity burning. The hot dot in the center of the room stood a woman Evelyn hadn't seen in 2 years, but knew all too well. Kaylin Thorne, the former chief data architect, brilliant, mysterious, once a rising star, then quietly vanished from the company's radar after a family emergency that, in hindsight, was clearly fabricated. Kaylin didn't flinch when Evelyn stepped inside. I was wondering how long it would take him to send you, she said, her voice calm, almost amused. She was standing in front of a console, fingers dancing across holographic keys. Evelyn raised the weapon, step away from the terminal. Kaylin tilted her head. You're better than this, smarter. You know what this company really is. I know it wasn't built on lies and theft. Kaylin's smile faded. You still think Alexander's innocent in all of this? You still think his hands are clean? Evelyn stepped forward slowly. I know what he's done to protect this company, and I know what he's lost. Kaylin laughed softly. That's the thing about grief, it makes people loyal to ghosts. Evelyn's hand didn't waver. What are you doing here? Kaylin turned back to the terminal, planting the final key. One line of quantum code. That's all it takes, and when it activates, this company's operating system will implode, slowly, over the course of weeks. Contracts will fail, investors will flee, regulatory bodies will intervene, and by the time they realize what happened, Vance Dynamics will be ash and memory. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. Why? Kaylin looked over her shoulder, and for the first time, there was pain in her eyes, because your CEO ruined everything. She stepped away from the console then, hands raised. I had a sister. She was a whistleblower inside a pharmaceutical company owned by one of Vance's subsidiaries. She found out they were suppressing clinical trials. She went public. She vanished. Evelyn's breath caught. Alexander didn't know, she said softly. I've seen how he operates. He doesn't bury truth. He chases it. He didn't know. Kaylin echoed bitterly. But he owns the machine that did. And ownership is guilt. Miss Hart. Evelyn hesitated. She could see the fire in Kaylin's eyes. It wasn't evil, it was grief distorted into rage. But that rage was about to destroy everything, including the people who had nothing to do with the Original crime. You want justice, Evelyn said. I do too, but you're not giving anyone justice. You're giving them extinction. I'm giving them the only thing they understand, Kaylin replied. Fear. Evelyn looked at the console. The command sequence was almost complete. She had seconds. She made a choice. Lowering the weapon, she walked slowly toward Kaylin. Then let me show you what real fear is, she whispered in at the last second. She slammed her hand into the emergency lockdown panel on the wall. Steel shutters dropped instantly. Alarm screamed to life. The console shut down mid-sequence. Security lockdown activated. Kaylin lunged, but Evelyn was faster. She hit her with the butt of the pistol, knocking her to the ground. Moments later, backup arrived to internal security officers and Alexander himself, breathless. Eyes locked on Evelyn first, then Kaylin. He helped Evelyn up, his hands trembling. You stopped it, he said. She nodded. But we need to talk. They moved to his private office, where Evelyn told him everything. Kaylin's confession. The corrupted pharma trial, the subsidiary buried in shell corporations. And for the first time, Alexander didn't defend the company. He sat in silence. Then, if I inherited that rot, it ends now. Evelyn stepped closer. That's why I came back. Not to save your company, but to help you become the kind of man who deserves to lead it. He looked at her then, eyes burning with something raw and real. I don't want to lead it alone, he said. Not anymore. She took his hand. I never asked you to. Outside, the storm that had threatened to tear them apart had passed. But inside that room, within those shattered walls, they were beginning to build something new. Something honest. Something neither of them had ever had, and it started with the truth. The next morning, the building felt like it was holding its breath. Vance Dynamics' usual rhythm and orchestrated ballet of polished suits, hushed conversations, and quietly buzzing elevators had stuttered. Something invisible pressed against the walls, an atmospheric shift that only those with instincts sharpened by survival could feel. Evelyn felt it immediately. She stepped into the lobby and scanned the room. There was no announcement, no press leak, but the silence was different today, thicker. Like the world was waiting for a decision that hadn't yet been made. And it had everything to do with the woman in the glass-walled holding suite to floors. Above, Kaylin Thorne, the night before, after the lockdown and confession. Legal had tried to seize control of the situation, but Alexander had overruled them, ordering internal containment and a classified debriefing between himself, Evelyn, and the director of ethics. No charges yet, no lawyers, just facts. Except facts had turned into fire. Now Evelyn stood beside Alexander in his war room, again this time with sunlight spilling through the windows. Instead of shadows, his sleeves were rolled to his elbows, hair slightly disheveled. Tie forgotten somewhere hours ago. On the table between them sat a single, printed file. Thorne report, unsealed version. Kaylin had given it to them voluntarily. It wasn't just a confession. It was a roadmap. The subsidiary in question, Velstein Pharma, based in Switzerland, had indeed buried adverse trial results in a treatment for autoimmune disorders. Those trials had shown increased mortality in long-term use, especially in women. Kaylin's sister had flagged it. Days later, she had been labeled unstable and declared missing, and the worst part, the incident had happened 6 years ago, just before Alexander took over the company. Before he even knew the name Velstein, Evelyn stared at the report, heart pounding. You were never supposed to find this, she whispered. Alexander's hands curled into fists. It was buried in a shelf company under another holding. My signature isn't on anything, but I inherited the silence. You inherited a lie, Evelyn said, voice quiet. But now you get to choose what happens next. He looked at her. You know what this could do, yes, she said. It could destroy part of the company, and me. No, she corrected. Covering it up would destroy you. Telling the truth might save someone else's life. He stared at her then, and she could see it, all the weight, all the fear, all the walls he'd spent years hiding behind, trembling on the edge of collapse. Then he picked up the phone, and he made the call. To the Department of Corporate Ethics, to the board, to the press liaison, one after another. He told them everything. Evelyn watched as the man she once thought was untouchable chose something most powerful men never dared to call an accountability. But it came at a cost. By noon, the board had called an emergency vote. Alexander's seat as CEO was now in question, not because he'd committed a crime, but because his truth might cost them billions. They called it fiduciary concern. Evelyn called it fear of consequence. In a boardroom packed with tension, she stood at Alexander's side as the 12 members filed in. She recognized every face, knew every agenda. One of them, a man named Greaves, old money and colder eyes, spoke first. "This isn't about ethics," he said. "It's about the survival of this company. The moment this scandal becomes public, investors will flee, partnerships will collapse, and we will be responsible for every domino that falls." Alexander stood slowly. "So you're suggesting we continue lying to the public, to our shareholders, and to the families of the people this drug harmed?" Greaves didn't flinch. "I'm suggesting we protect the company." "No," Evelyn said, voice cutting across the room. "You're suggesting we bury another body to protect the brand." All heads turned. "I've read every line of that report," she said. "I've traced the lies. And let me tell you what I learned. This company isn't bleeding because we told the truth. It's been rotting because we didn't." Alexander placed a hand on her arm, not to stop her, but to steady himself, because her words were his truth too. "You say this is about survival," he added, voice steady. "Then let me be clear. Vance Dynamics survives because people believe in it, and I refuse to lead a lie." Silence, cold, heavy. Then Greaves spoke again. "Then you will no longer lead it at all." The vote passed barely. Alexander was suspended, pending investigation. As security escorted him from the boardroom, not in handcuffs, but in symbolism. He turned to Evelyn. "I can fight this," he said, "but I don't know if I can do it alone." She walked beside him to the elevator, head held high. "You're not alone. You never were." That night, the news broke the scandal tied to Velstein. A formal apology from the outgoing CEO and a promise of a full investigation hit every major outlet. Social media exploded. But something strange happened. Instead of public outrage, came something else. Respect. People didn't see a disgraced executive. They saw a man who had the courage to tear down the empire he inherited in order to rebuild something better. And right beside him, in every photo, in every interview clip, in every moment where the world looked for answers, stood Evelyn Hart, unflinching. The storm was far from over, but together they had weathered the truth, and in doing so, they had become something the board never expected: unstoppable. The weeks after the world turned upside down, Evelyn Hart walked into the boardroom as something entirely new. Not a secretary, not a background operator, not even just a woman who helped expose the truth. She walked in as a force. The interim board was already seated when she entered, Greaves at the head, flanked by the remaining members who hadn't resigned or been implicated in the Velstein cover-up. Most of them didn't look her in the eye. The rest looked at her with unease, respect, maybe even fear. She didn't care. The sun cut through the glass walls, casting long streaks across the conference table. On it sat two folders, one marked with the Vance Dynamics seal, the other unmarked, dark gray, slightly worn, the kind of folder no one admits exists. Evelyn took the seat at the foot of the table. "Shall we begin?" she asked. Greaves cleared his throat. "Miss Hart, I understand you've requested to present a proposal, but I must remind you your role here is undefined. You hold no official seat." Evelyn smiled, slow and deliberate. "Not yet." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. She opened the unmarked folder. "This," she said, sliding documents across the table, "is a complete blueprint for the ethical reformation of Vance Dynamics. Independent oversight, third-party compliance audits, whistleblower protections, real ones, not the PR kind." One of the board members, a woman named Lee, frowned. "You're proposing we get the board's autonomy." "No," Evelyn corrected. "I'm proposing you earn your autonomy." She stood now, walking slowly around the room as she spoke, her presence commanding. "You've all spent years playing chess with public image, acquisitions, numbers. But the world has changed, and the only thing more dangerous than a lie." She paused, placing her hand on the second folder, the one marked with the Vance seal, "is a company that refuses to evolve after truth comes to light." Greaves leaned back, arms crossed. "And what happens if we decline your recommendation?" She met his gaze. "Then the second folder gets mailed to every investigative journalist on the East Coast. You're threatening us." "I'm giving you a choice," she said. "Clean house, reinvent, or die a slow, public death." There was silence. Then Greaves chuckled. "You become quite the negotiator, Miss Hart." She sat down again. "I learned from the best." At that exact moment, the double doors opened behind her, and Alexander Vance walked in. The board froze. He wore no suit today, no tie, just a charcoal button-down, sleeves rolled, stubble on his jaw, and a fire in his eyes that Evelyn hadn't seen in weeks. A man no longer defending his position, but reclaiming it. "I see the trials begun without me," he said, voice even but edged with steel. Greaves blinked. "You're under suspension, effective as of 30 minutes ago," Alexander interrupted, tossing the document onto the table. "The ethics committee has cleared me of personal wrongdoing and reinstated my CEO status contingent on an internal vote in compliance with newly outlined reforms." He looked at Evelyn. Her reforms. Then he walked to the head of the table, facing the board like a general on the eve of war. "I've made mistakes," he said, "but none greater than underestimating the woman who saved this company when no one else could." He gestured to Evelyn. "And now I'm putting forward a motion to create a new executive seat, Chief Integrity Officer, someone with authority above legal, with direct oversight of every high-level decision, someone who doesn't answer to me, someone who answers only to the truth." He turned to Evelyn again. "And I want that seat to belong to her." The board was stunned. Greaves stood, livid. "That's not how we operate." "Exactly," Alexander cut in. "That's the problem." He stepped aside. "The vote is yours. But let me be clear, without her, I walk. And without both of us, this company becomes a footnote in a cautionary tale." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Lee raised her hand. "I second the motion." Another hand, and another. Greaves sat down slowly, face tall with fury, but he didn't raise an objection. The motion passed. Evelyn didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded once, stood, and shook Alexander's hand, not as a subordinate, not as a savior, but as an equal. The boardroom emptied soon after. One by one, the members filed out, but Alexander and Evelyn remained. He turned to her, quieter now. "You didn't have to come back." "I didn't," she agreed. "I chose to." He stepped closer, tension crackling in the air between them again, familiar, electric, and entirely different this time. "You changed the way I lead," he said, "but you also changed me." She looked up at him. "Then don't go back to the man you were." "I can't," he whispered, brushing his fingers against hers. "Because of you." The city sparkled behind them, steel and light, and the quiet hum of everything they'd built in, everything still left to rebuild. This wasn't just a victory, it was a reckoning, and they were just getting started. Asterisk. The night of the Vance Dynamics Reclamation Gala arrived like the calm before a storm, deceptively serene, breathtakingly elegant, and humming with undercurrents no one could see. Held on the rooftop of the company's Manhattan headquarters, the gala wasn't just a celebration. It was a public reintroduction of an empire nearly brought to its knees, and the world wanted to see how it stood back up. Glass towers glowed against a velvet skyline. Strings of lights curved like constellations across the rooftop canopy. The city buzzed far below, but up here there was only music, murmurs, and anticipation thick enough to bottle. Evelyn Hart stepped out onto the rooftop in a black satin gown, minimal and fierce. Her hair swept back, her posture regal. She didn't need jewels to shine. She was the moment. All eyes followed her as she crossed the space. But she wasn't walking toward attention. She was walking toward destiny. At the far end of the rooftop, beneath a sleek, modern arch laced with soft golden lights, stood Alexander Vance. He was in a classic tuxedo, tailored to perfection, but nothing about him felt rehearsed. His expression wasn't the polished mask of a CEO, it was real, unfiltered, watching her like she was gravity. Evelyn reached him just as the music softened and the lights dimmed. He turned to the crowd, voice steady. "I don't believe in speeches anymore," he said, drawing chuckles from some and silence from others. "Not the ones written by PR departments or polished by lawyers. I believe in truths, the kind that risk everything." He looked at Evelyn, only her. "This company nearly died," he said, "not because of market shifts or technology failures, but because we forgot the one thing that makes us more than powerful: accountability." Evelyn felt the weight of his words land across the rooftop. Eyes turned, breaths held. "I inherited a legacy built on brilliance," Alexander continued, "but brilliance without integrity is a weapon, and I never would have seen that, never, if it weren't for her." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, black velvet box. Gasps, a ripple through the crowd, but Evelyn didn't move. She couldn't, because in that moment, Every step she'd taken, every betrayal she'd uncovered, every risk, every wound collapsed into this singular breath of time. I used to think love was a liability, he said, voice quieter now. Meant only for her, a weakness. I built walls to protect myself. I trusted no one. Not until the woman I underestimated walked into my office, stood in the fire, and refused to let me burn alone. He opened the box. Inside, a single ring. Simple, elegant. A deep sapphire set in platinum, gleaming like stormlight. You didn't just save my company, Evelyn Hart. You saved me. Her breath trembled. You don't belong behind a desk or in the shadows. You belong exactly where you are, leading, guiding, changing the game. And if you'll have me, I want to stand beside you in every room, in every war, in every storm we're yet to face. He dropped to one knee. Evelyn Hart, will you marry me? For a heartbeat, the city froze, and then she laughed, not from shock, not from disbelief, but from the wild, beautiful truth of it. She dropped to her knees to grabbing his face in her hands, eyes burning. Yes, you stubborn, brilliant idiot. She whispered. Yes, the rooftop erupted, applause, cheers, but Evelyn barely heard it. Her world had narrowed to this moment. This man, this life she'd never dared to imagine, but now couldn't imagine without. Later that night, as the guests danced and the stars shimmered above the city, Alexander and Evelyn stood at the edge of the rooftop, fingers entwined, watching the skyline stretch endlessly into the future. He looked at her, eyes soft. Think, we've earned a quiet chapter. She smiled. You mean the kind where no one's trying to sabotage us, assassinate us in boardrooms, or plant quantum bombs in our servers? Exactly. Not a chance, she said. They laughed together, leaning into one another like twin lighthouses, weathering the same endless storm. Because empires may fall, legacies may rot, but when do people dare to choose truth over power, love over fear, and each other above all? That's not the end of a story. That's the beginning of a revolution. And Evelyn Hart and Alexander Vance, they weren't just rewriting the rules. They were becoming the new law.